Dharmendra Pradhan, the Education Minister, has in fact resigned. He's uploaded his resignation on Twitter. It's addressed to the Prime Minister. He talks about how he has, from day one, taken responsibility for the NEET paper leak. And he said, it's sad to see the events of the last 10 days. This is not a matter of individual prestige for me. Dharmendra Pradhan says on his resignation, and he resigns. He also says anti-national forces must not take advantage of the situation at Jantar Mantar and across the country. There are reactions coming in from across the country, but fundamentally it is a victory for the young people who stood their ground. The Cockroach Janata Party, when they started off, it seemed like they were asking for the impossible. It was not going to happen because this was not a government that was in the habit of, granting the demands of protests. It was after Sonam Wangchuk came in and lent a sort of legitimacy through his hunger fast that really things started to move. And when Sonam Wangchuk was picked up by the government behind those white sheets from Jantar Mantar against his will and moved to hospital, that is when the mood really changed. So fundamentally, in my opinion, the government made two big miscalculations. One, actually forcing Sonam Wangchuk out of Jantar Mantar, moving him like that in front of everybody without his, without his consent. And secondly, the massive lathi charge that was done on protesters on the 20th of July on Monday. Post that, the pincer attack that came at the government from all sides, from the, from the opposition, from the young people who refused to budge from Jantar Mantar, irrespective of all of the things, the lathi charge, the pellet guns. In the last 24 hours, their food and their water has been cut off, their sanitation has been cut off, there are no clean toilets there, food is not being allowed, all transport has been stopped, roads are closed, shops are closed. There's a story in the Indian Express that the police was actually going through the garbage to find out which outlets of which restaurants were sending food, and then visiting those outlets to tell them to stop sending food. So a lot of stops were pulled, but nothing worked. The young people did not budge. And then the outpouring of support that came from the rest of the country, protests all over the country, clearly at this point, supporting the protesters in Jantar Mantar. The Gen Z protest, this is India's first Gen Z protest. It's a massive victory for this generation of protesters, and it's a massive victory for the democracy that they seem to have resuscitated. Also, if we look at the main few points as to why the government might have granted something like this that they would have otherwise maybe even 5 days ago thought was completely out of the question, was one, the protest became specifically about the Prime Minister. The slogans, the things that were being said on those posters, it started to become personal about the Prime Minister, and that would not have been something that would have gone down well. The Prime Minister himself stepping in after making statements, putting out videos repeatedly night after night, trying to bridge a gap with this generation that they seem to be of view in the government that they had lost touch with. There was also a story that came out yesterday that the cabinet met, and there was an advisory that was given to the cabinet that they should spend more time on Instagram and less on Twitter, because that's where the opinion is being formed, and the government was clearly in damage control. Then, of course, the fact that Parliament did not budge or move, and the opposition here very interestingly stood with the protesters. There was some question about whether Rahul Gandhi was pulling in the opposite direction, but in the last couple of days, he brought the pellet gun victim, he brought today the ones who had fasted, the young women, and he pushed their ideas forward and he supported them. And so it became even more clear that A, the students and the CJP is not going to budge until they get what they want, and two, everyone seems to be supporting that sit-in. But the real, I think, the pin that drove the hardest at this point and broke that camel's back was the international media. All over international media, my team and I went through the BBC, the Associated Press, Washington Post, New York Times, Al Jazeera, the South China Morning Post. They were all calling this the largest challenge to Prime Minister Modi's government, and they were carrying visuals of police, beating young people. They were carrying visuals of, posters that were being held out. They were talking about how these were Gen Z protests in India, and we've seen Gen Z protests in other parts of our neighborhood, but never here. This would have not been an image that the government would have wanted broadcast across the world, especially when they wanted to show that India is a stable democracy in comparison to our, to our neighbors. So obviously at some point through the course of last night, it was decided that Dharmendra Pradhan is going to have to be offered up at this point in order to end these protests. There didn't seem to be any other way to do it. People were not budging. There's some information I'm looking at on my Twitter account of some lathi charging, but there is a celebration mostly in Jantar Mantar from what we are looking at, and that pressure that built constantly. There was a story that was leaked to some mainstream channels. I think India Today carried it, NDTV carried it, that the government is not going to ask Pradhan to resign. But that story was not met well. So obviously they did a sort of a dipstick survey of the opinion and realized that that was not going to fly either. And after cutting off food, cutting off water, cutting off sanitation, the garbage has not been picked up from Jantar Mantar for several days. These young people did not budge. They knew what they wanted. They were willing to make a reel about it, and they were not going to give in. And they finally got the government to agree to what they wanted. There is a sense, though, after this, that this particular government in this particular term is different. It's a little more mortal, and it's possible that that damage can be done, because they seemed invincible before these protests started. Remember when they defeated TMC in Bengal, and they came out of those elections completely victorious, and then after that the TMC was, the MPs and the MLAs from TMC deserted their party to join the NDA. The same thing happened here in Maharashtra with the Uddhav Thackeray Shiv Sena. There was a sense of invincibility that seems to have now broken, and it's very possible, that from today onwards, this government is not going to be the same again. For now, this is where we are. Huge victory for Abhijit Dibke, who started this off as a joke and then stood by it and, left Boston, came back to India, sat in Jantar Mantar for all of these days. We understood from yesterday or from this morning that he has typhoid, and he continues to be there, and they've managed to push through. He just made a statement saying there's no need to be afraid. This is a democracy. He has resigned. We have 2 more demands. We won't just go like this. He says the family of the children who have committed suicide or who have died by suicide should receive the compensation of 1 crore rupees. They should get it. 1 crore rupees compensation to those families. And the second, the police goons who acted as goons on the 20th, action must be taken against them. Remember, do not mess with the cockroaches, end quote. So he is currently speaking at Jantar Mantar while I'm watching this, and it's very interesting. Just a clarification, for some people who don't seem to have understood this, when the NEET exam was cancelled because the papers had leaked, there were 20 young students who died by suicide out of the sheer shock of the fact that an exam that they had spent a year, maybe 2 years preparing for and then finished, they're going to have to do all over again. It is those families that the compensation is being demanded for right now, that Abhijit Dibke and company are asking for compensation for. Because I had a few people talk to me saying, no, but how can you prove and how can you compensate everybody who has lost a loved one to suicide? And that's not what that is. This is specifically about those, and there are record cases, and there's actually suicide notes that the police have got. So that is a specific demand in this case for those people who have not understood it. But this is a victory unlike any other that we have seen in India in a very, very long time. The last time we saw protests that got sharp reactions from government was in UPA 2. So as a journalist who has been chronicling this from day one, who has spent a lot of time basically fact-checking the information that's coming in, and there's been a lot of fake news, there's been a lot of misleading information that has come in, my congratulations and my kudos to the young people who stood their ground for what it is they wanted and managed to get arguably one of the most strongest governments that we've seen in India. You got them to budge.